Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I had to wait for my cue from Bob Doran because tonight, for the very first time, we are live streaming on YouTube this event. So thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ellen Sullivan-Cravato. I'm the CEO of New Canaan Library. And I'm so thrilled to be celebrating my one-year anniversary in that role this month. So many things, so many wonderful things have occurred in the past year. Most recently, our celebrated nomination as IFLA's Best Public Library of the Year 2025. I'm sure you all heard about it. It's a really exciting and important nomination. It's almost as good as a win, but I will say that we're in very elite company, and I wanted to be able to tell you that tonight because only 7 U.S. libraries have ever been on the short nominee list, and only 1 U.S. library has ever won. Missoula, Montana. We'll let them have their win. And I'm pretty sure that apart from Caitlin Lowe and Rob, the only people who got up at 5 a.m. to watch us present to an audience in Kazakhstan, which is where the award was given this year, it really truly was an honor for us to be able to represent all the hard work of our volunteers, our committees, our staff, our team, our architects, our builders, et cetera. And I just want to give great thanks to everybody's work for enabling this amazing recognition. We lost to the Canadians. Maybe I don't feel so bad. It's okay. September is also the month in which we typically announce our Lit Lunch author, and so I'm very pleased tonight to give you all a sneak preview of who that is. Daniel Mason's wonderful novel, North Woods, is going to be our Lit Lunch author this year, and those invitations will be going out shortly. If you're not sure about how to receive an invitation, I invite you to reach out to me or to Allison Zinzenko, who's in the room and is going to wave, perhaps, if you can find her, for more information. Finally, after a lovely summer hiatus, September is kind of back to school for our adult programs team. We have a remarkable lineup of speakers who will be coming and activities organized for this year, including Wally Lamb, Ellen Hildebrand, Dory Greenspan, which if you don't know who she is, she's the queen of cookies. It's very important that you come to that. And also I want to just do a little plug for something we're calling the Mural Project, which is a community-wide art project that everyone is invited to participate in and join in, even if you don't know anything about mosaic art. It will create a permanent art exhibit that will be hung in the mezzanine, the living room space, and it's going to be a beautiful addition to the artwork in the library. I hope you will sign up online to become part of that. I need to offer very special thanks to a few people. Todd Lavieri, in particular. And I will say Ian Hobbs too, but okay, Todd was really the Peggy Noonan superfan whose support and encouragement helped to make this evening possible. And thank you, Todd. I'm very delighted to help facilitate one of your life bucket list experiences. And just as an aside, I want to say that I'd like to just remark that within 42 minutes of putting this event on our calendar or our e-blast, I can't recall what we did first, we were fully booked. The room holds 325 people. We then went on to have a wait list of 1,000 people. And that is the reason that we've gone to these efforts to try to do this very first YouTube approach. So I hope everybody will join me in thanking our remarkable library team, Mickey Porta and everyone who helped make that happen, and especially to the heroic Bob Doran and his team, who's working here tonight. This even surpassed Brooke Shields, I would like you to know, Peggy. And I thought I got in trouble for not having enough space for that. The Richard Salant Lecture Series is dedicated to deepening the community's news, literacy, and understanding of responsibility of news media in a free society. Programs here are intended to foster public interest in news and current affairs and the manner of its dissemination, with a critical eye to how coverage is responsibly and fairly provided. This aligns with the principles of Dick Salant, formerly president of CBS News, who introduced us all to 60 Minutes, the CBS Morning Show, and Sunday Morning during his tenure. Salant was a New Canaan resident for many years and a defender of the news media's First Amendment rights. And I'm sorry to say, Sarah Gleason, his daughter, was meant to be with us this evening, but she was unwell, and so hopefully she's watching from afar. This happens to be our 25th Salant lecture. We were happy to count that up today to learn that. And I thought for your own benefit, you should know that past guests have included such luminaries as Walter Cronkite and Mike Wallace, and of course Brian Williams and Joe Scarborough, Bob Schieffer, Leslie Stahl, Brian Lehrer. Okay, so on to our guest this evening. Peggy Noonan is the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist whose weekly opinion column in the Wall Street Journal is amongst the most important and long-lasting commentaries on contemporary society and history ever created. She is a celebrated New York Times bestselling author who began her illustrious career as a radio news reporter at CBS, Dick Salant's beloved home, and I believe she had the occasion to maybe run into Dick during her time there. He was her first boss. Miss Noonan was, correct me if I'm wrong, mistaken, raised in Brooklyn and New Jersey?
Brooklyn, Long Island.
Brooklyn, Long Island, and New Jersey. Can't leave out Strong Island. In a vibrant Italian, Irish Catholic family, and graduated from Fairleigh Dickinson.
Yep.
She arrived a little late. This is how we're not handling having not done the prep. As most of you know, her earliest notoriety was won through the brilliant and much cherished work that she executed as a special assistant and speechwriter for Ronald Reagan and George Bush, among others. Experiences which she recounts in superb detail in her acclaimed memoir, What I Saw at the Revolution, which I just recently reread, and we have it here at the library, so make sure you check that out. Her latest book, which we're here to talk about this evening, A Certain Idea of America, is a compilation of 80 of her essays from the Wall Street Journal over the years, which are remarkable for their wisdom and their wit, but also for the scope of topics that they cover. And it must be said, for their unflinching honesty. She writes with clear-eyed urgency about the internal and external dangers facing our republic. Scary. She herself has said it is meant to be a celebration of what America has been, is, and can once again be. I have no idea how we're going to cover all this territory in one evening. Wish me luck. Please welcome Peggy Noonan to our stage.
That was so great of you. Thank you so much. Am I doing this wrong yet? Does that sound good?
It sounds like Peggy's mic needs to be turned on. Let me see.
Aha. Hello.
Hello.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. Ellen, your introduction of me, normally when an introduction is that flattering, actually it's because I wrote it. And so I thank you for that. May I say, I had not noted that this was the Richard Salant Lecture until this evening, until Mike Wheeler took me aside and said, look at that name. Wasn't he your first boss when you went to CBS News? He was president of CBS News. He was, in those days when I first joined CBS, extremely ancient, by which I mean kind of 48 or 49. And he was just this grand old man of journalism, old school journalism. He was one of the people who hired Walter Cronkite and Doug Edwards before him to be anchor of the CBS Evening News, such an august institution. So anyway, I just feel honored to be here in a lecture named for him, and it feels to me very much like a continuation that makes me happy.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. You've just answered the first question without me asking it, which was
Could I say one
incredibly
more
helpful.
thing? Just one more thing.
Please.
I said this, I met with the boards and various local political figures before I came into this room and was able to meet you. And we were talking and I just blurted, in the twilight this evening, going from Old Stanford into New Canaan, coming into New Canaan, taking some back roads. We met up with a little traffic. In the twilight, New Canaan looked so beautiful. The white houses were shining. The little brick houses were shining. The roads looked good. The grass and the trees looked good. I got the strong impression it's going on in New Canaan. And you know, I'm not always here, but I'm not infrequently in Connecticut, and you just looked gorgeous tonight. So I wanted to share it. And by the way, you all had, because it's so beautiful, yesterday, today, tonight, because it's so lovely, you all could have been at 14 different things tonight, and I thank you very much for coming here. Okay, that's all. Yes?
So, Peggy, you've had one of the most distinguished careers in all of journalism history. And
yes, I have.
Your words have shaped the political conversation, and I'm wondering, what do you see as the role of a free press or commentariat today, and how has it changed over the years?
Oh my gosh, the great and essential question. The biggest cliche is a cliche because it is so true. The founders of this country didn't make freedom of speech and freedom of religion the First Amendment because it was an afterthought. Sorry, the very beginning of what we are, because it was an afterthought. It is essential to us, these two things. The freedom to say what you wish, what you believe is true, the freedom to make an argument, the freedom to take your stand, the freedom to make a case, the freedom to say politically we should be doing this and not this, the freedom to paint a picture, to do a photograph, to mount a theatrical production. All of these freedoms are at our heart, are essential, are our DNA, and we cannot do without them. And if we ever are forced to do without them, we will be less ourselves or not ourselves. Everything I just said about freedom of press, ditto for freedom of religion.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to take us back a little bit to some of your early period, and going back a little bit to the early history. I have to thank Kevin Moynihan. Kevin, are you in the room tonight? No, he's not. I ran into Kevin Moynihan, who was our former first selectman in the Stacks a couple of weeks ago, and he told me all about Bentley Elliott, who was a 35-year resident of New Canaan. Bentley Elliott is the person who hired you to be the speechwriter at the White House.
Yes.
So I made a little phone call down south to have a chat and introduce myself to Bentley Elliott.
Oh my goodness, he didn't tell me we were emailing last night. He said nothing.
He didn't want me to mention his name at all, so if you're watching, I'm terribly sorry. So he mentioned that at the time he was looking for a new young speechwriter, he had a friend, Kevin Lynch, I believe, at the National Review, who said, I have a very talented young lady. Unfortunately, she's working with Dan Rather.
That's right.
Seemed a bit of a negative to the Reaganites. It took some convincing to bring you on board. Could you recount a little bit of that early history at the White House and the time you spent working with Ben and others?
Oh my gosh, well it was so fortunate. It was one of the great blessings of my life. I had started out in journalism, again with Mike Wheeler over in the corner there, at WEEI-AM in Boston, an all-news radio station. I started out being a writer for the news that was on the air. I then went down to CBS News in New York and became in time the daily commentary, radio commentary writer for Dan Rather, the brand new anchor for the CBS Evening News who had taken Walter Cronkite's place. Dan Rather was such a great guy. He was a wonderful boss. We did essentially a column every day, 5 days a week for about 3 years, I think, just more than 3 years. Anyway, he was wonderful. I was becoming, in those days, in my 20s, more and more politically conservative. And not only just politically conservative, but someone thinking about it, reading about it, talking about it. It was becoming essential to my nature. Every time I met a conservative going through CBS News in those days, early 1980s, I would say to them, they'd say, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I'd say, all I want to be is a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan. I wanted to work for Reagan. And I was a writer, so speechwriter was the thing. I knew I couldn't run something. I didn't have any bureaucratic or managerial talents. I'm a writer, I want to work for him. Word made its way to Bentley Elliott through Kevin Lynch, and I think perhaps others. There's a conservative who works for Dan Rather who loves Reagan. And you must understand, the Reagan White House was beleaguered. It was the most conservative White House since Calvin Coolidge's in 1920. And it was beleaguered by a media it felt beleaguered, I will put it that fairly, by a media that was in general a moderate, liberal, national media, the networks, the big newspapers. So they thought Dan was kind of a commie. Dan was so great to me that when I told him, you know how I feel about Reagan, he'd go, I know. I said, I'm going to try to be a speechwriter for him. And Dan's first remark was, well, how can I help? Should I denounce you? He really said that. Anyway, one day, Ben Elliott, having heard about me, called me up at my office at CBS News. I'm actually trying to shorten this because I'm afraid I'll go down various trails. It was a lovely office. It was beige. So he calls me at CBS News, and he says, amazing, he introduced himself. He said, I run speechwriting at the Reagan White House. I said, thank you, Jesus. We chatted a bit. He said that 20 years before, he indeed had started his own career, like on the third floor at CBS News, doing, I think, a production job, I forget.
They sent him to Attica.
Say it again?
They sent him to Attica to cover a story. They turned him into a producer after
Oh,
that.
no kidding.
Yep.
So there he was as a CBS News producer, but he was a conservative, and he wanted to be in the political trenches, and he left media and he went into politics. Anyway, 20 years later, he's on the phone with me. I will never forget this moment. He was so nice, so friendly, so encouraging. He just wanted to say, it's not easy to be a conservative at big media. God bless you. And if you ever come down to Washington, give me a call and say hi. I am not the most proactive person in the world, but he said that. And I immediately said, that's funny. I'm going to Washington the day after tomorrow. And I believe, I can't remember asking, but I believe he knew I was totally lying. He laughed on the phone like, ha ha. And then he said, well, I guess you're going to come see me. And that was the beginning of my going to see him. Oh, I'd never been in a government office building. It was so exciting, the old executive office building. Anyway, I was very frank with him. I said, this is what I want in my life, to write speeches for and with Ronald Reagan. And so we began a conversation that, 6 or 8 months later came to fruition.
Well, he had something very interesting to say about you when you first arrived. It was a bit of a culture shift for you going to the White House.
Yes.
He said in the beginning, you showed up in a skirt that looked like a burlap bag.
You know, it's true. It was my famous beige linen skirt, which apparently was very wrinkled. I had no sense of how to do it. I was surrounded by adults. I was in my early 30s and had been working in a news room all of my professional life, which was like 8 years. And we just dressed in jeans and a T-shirt. We didn't care. They didn't care then. They don't care now. We didn't care how we looked. I personally never cared how I looked. And suddenly I'm in like a White House in the old executive office building, and there's a formality to the dress and to the code. And I flailed a little bit. It took me a while to figure out just how to do the surfacial things.
Well, what he said, just to follow up so you don't think he was being cruel, was he admired your disinterest in fitting into a mold and that it marked you as confident, fearless, and original. And all of those things he very highly valued. So just so you know, he worshipped you, I think you know. And
Do you know, I worship him back, and what a great way to say weirdo. Why, she was not eager to fill into a mold. I was a weirdo, and he put up with it. And it wasn't easy in a Republican White House to have, oh, that's the weirdo.
he also commented a great deal about your relentless work ethic, how hard you worked. You were working all of the time. And he also commented on your very core conservatism. And so I thought maybe we should spend a minute talking about what were the foundations for you of that core conservatism? Was it, I know you have a deep religious faith, was it also heritage, family, education? Was it a blend of those things? What was the core?
That's a great question. I must admit to you, I've been thinking of the answer for 40 years, and the answer keeps changing. It doesn't go from black to white, but it shifts a little bit. I almost think now I was increasingly conservative in the 1970s and 80s. I was becoming increasingly conservative because I had Irish Catholic common sense, because I had had many experiences in life that left me without a tropism toward illusion. It's funny, it wasn't all, quote, thought through. I read political theory after I saw myself as a conservative. Isn't that funny? Yeah. I mean, I read Whittaker Chambers on Hayek and Adam Smith after I understood what I was. I did have two political experiences that gave me powerful nudges. One is I was a young writer, reporter in Boston, Massachusetts during the busing crisis. Mm-hmm. Busing was a great progressive, liberal endeavor that said the schools are much too segregated and we will change this by busing the kids from here to here and the kids from here to here. And I went and covered it and saw kids constantly crying and parents frustrated, and Irish Catholics who were from the great Southie neighborhood feeling patronized and put down. I mean, I'm aware I actually still make a face when I remember what I saw. They felt patronized by, some things don't change, a liberal elite that didn't care about their little ideas about neighborhood and home and cohesion and tradition. That was one thing that made me realize I am not liberal, because if that's what liberal is, I'm so not that. The other thing was just before it, which was experiencing going through college during the anti-war movement. I was anti-war myself. I came to see Vietnam early on as a mistake. This will never work. This is not good. And it is the poor kids I know who are getting drafted, and not like middle and upper middle class kids. And I didn't like that, but I viscerally disliked the anti-American, anti-Western, snot-nosed put down of who we are that was coming from the anti-war left. So I was anti-war, but not on their bus, you know?
I think we can all feel and sense how passionate you are and how much emotion you bring to your writing.
Still. Isn't it amazing?
Well, it's a...
I find myself, I'm still making faces about busing. I can't believe it.
I think about all of the brilliant metaphors and some of the most known quotes in the world, speeches given by Reagan and Bush where you were the wordsmith. But I was thinking in particular, I reread the Pointe du Lac essay and the speech that you wrote for Ronald Reagan when he spoke at Normandy. and he was paying tribute to the Pointe du Lac soldiers who had fought in World War II. And there was a particular line where you were referencing their achievement, and he said, "You sign the air with your vivid honor." And I have to say, I can't imagine a journalist today writing, or a speechwriter being able to think in such poetic terms. So I wonder if you can talk, I mean, one of the things Ben also said was how much he admired and respected your great erudition, your knowledge of great classic literature, et cetera. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about some of the poetry and the metaphors that you always were reaching for in your great speech writing?
Oh, you know, I was very proud that President Reagan quoted in that speech, in the Pointe du Lac speech, as we call it, as we called it in speech writing, mispronouncing the name of Pointe du Lac, which I can
just
never
called it Pointe
get
du
right,
Lac, which
but
is
you know
wrong,
how to
so.
do it. You know how to do it. He was quoting Stephen Spender from his poem, "I Think Continually on Those Who Are Truly Great, who in their lives fought for life and left the vivid air signed with their honor." Many people who go into writing in politics, it's political writing. I think it is true that many now who do that, maybe especially on the Republican side, are people who come from politics and who come from campaigns and who come from working on campaigns and understandably and respectably from political experience. When I joined the Reagan White House, I don't think I was a registered Republican. I had no political experience. I'd spent all of my life not having political experience, but I was a reader. I loved literature. I loved novels. I loved poetry, and was lucky enough to grow up in a public school system in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that respected poetry and gave the kids the work of American poets who were themselves famous, like Robert Frost. Poets were really famous in America when I was a kid. Robert Frost and Edna St. Vincent Millay, and so many others. I'm blocking on the names now because I have to think of them, but they were real personages. I knew their work. I cared about their work. I cared about literature before I cared about politics, and just enjoyed it, just loved it, still do.
Hopefully we can also take those sentiments forward to accrue to libraries.
To what?
To accrue to libraries and feelings about libraries, would you say?
Oh, I do have feelings about libraries. Why, let me share them. There were two things that gave us books when I was a kid. Oh, three things, I guess. The school library. Every school had a library. You could borrow books. But they were a little anodyne and, you know, school books. Or the local public library, which had books for grown-ups and children and everybody in between, and many of them were sound and sturdy and fabulous, and some of them were a little out there, and some of them you shouldn't have been reading. I liked them best. And there was a local, but anyway, you could get those books for free. A big book could be published in America, and you, somehow in the suburbs, might hear about it 6 months later. And you could put your name on a sheet at the local public library and say, I want that book. And they would let you know whenever you came by, oh, we got the book, and they'd give it to you. You could read it for free for 10 days or 2 weeks. What a fabulous thing. What a sound and productive and healthy use of public money to make the kids and the people of your populace able to read and eager to read and conversant with the cultural facts of their nation. What a fabulous thing. The other thing was this was possibly run by the public library, but we had something called the book truck.
Yes.
Do you remember that? It would come about once a week, once every 2 weeks.
The bookmobile.
The bookmobile. It would just come. It had big doors on the side. It would come, it would park on Illinois Avenue. They'd open the big doors this way and that way, and you could look at books. It was like a bus full of books, and you could borrow them for 2 weeks or 10 days. How fabulous it was. I mean, every cliche about it, about a book, you know, a book is a ship, a book is another nation, a book is visiting the world, a book is learning about life. To have been part of a humble family out in the suburbs of America in the 50s and 60s, in a country that was aspirational, that aspired to things, what a gift.
Well, the spirit is alive here and well at the New Canaan Library, folks.
Why, yes, it is. Can I note something? You think of Americans as at home on their screens, whichever screen it is. On election night, you might find yourself at this point, if you're excited about it, having a 5-screen night. The screen here, the one here, the one here, the one here, the one you're texting on. But we think of Americans pretty often at home on a screen. I took a little tour on the way to this room of your library. You have people upstairs who are all together. Do you know what I mean? You've got teenagers using your computers, and frankly, they're not just using the computers. It's a wonderful thing to see. There's a sense of community here that is very nice, and a little unexpected, honestly. Well done.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for making it happen. Okay, I'd love to move now on to talking a little bit about this wonderful compilation. The title of your book, A Certain Idea of America, I understand, is borrowed from Charles de Gaulle's memoir, A Certain Idea of France.
Yes.
So you describe this as a book about loving America and wanting to write about that love. In the foreword, you say that what you loved writing about most was honest praise. And I wonder if you might be able to elaborate. Can you tell us what you meant by saying you love telling? What was the through line was my question, and one of the ways you answered it in the foreword was by saying you like to give honest praise.
Yes, yes. Honest praise is a pleasure to utter, and honest praise, you always know if it's honest if you receive it. The idea of a certain idea of America as a title and as a book did come, as you said, from the first line of Charles de Gaulle's war memoirs, which are very happily, I think, translated as all of my life I have had a certain idea of France. When I read that years ago, I thought, wow, I've long had a certain idea of America. Remember this. My idea about it is, my feelings about my country are not really purple mountains majesty thoughts, because I know I would love America if it were a hole in the ground. I do not fully go in with the idea of I love America, because America is an idea, and it is a good idea. Margaret Thatcher was enamored of that thought. But I don't think of America as only an idea. Our great movie about our national pastime, long-time national pastime, is not called Field of Ideas. It is called Field of Dreams. That sport, baseball, so reflects who we are. It's a long, cool game. It's punctuated by triumph and loss and enduring and going on. I do a little thing in the book about Field of Dreams, which I just recommend you take a look at, but it leaves me sometimes a little bit choked, so I'm not going to do it. However, I think of America as a place that was founded on this most extraordinary insight and assertion that we are all equal, that where you start in life does not by any means determine where you will end up. We have been giving these thoughts and assumptions down the generation, mother to son and father to daughter, over and over through whatever peril was hitting us, you know, from the horrors of the frontier through the Great Depression and beyond. We have kept it going. We have protected our Constitution. When I look at our history, it seems to me a miracle. And I love America because it's where the miracle is. Full stop.
Well, I think that's
so there you are.
So the book is 80 essays that were selected out of over 400 that you'd written for the Wall Street Journal. I think
Yes.
I can't imagine choosing. It would be like choosing your favorite child. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what went into your thinking about the selection. And then I'd really love for you to talk about this idea, one particular set of chapters where Peggy brings out her stick, as she calls it, and she goes after some folks in a rather unvarnished way. But anyway, how did you choose amongst the 400?
If I got together with my publisher and we brought out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of columns, and we went through each one, for about 400 of them. We went through each one, and if she said, I love this, it was probably in, and if I said, that was really important to me, it was probably in. And if we ever said, oh, that one was fun, that was in too. So it wasn't that hard. It was fun. It was a delight. You know, and it's a horrible delight. In a way you don't, it's a funny thing to reread things that you wrote. If you still like them, it's a really wonderful experience because you feel like you didn't waste your time. You know, and that's just like a good feeling. Another funny thing about it is when I've got, this is my second collection, when I've gone over, I once went over about like 35 or 40 years of work, and I realized, and I say this because I have a feeling it's an existential statement about all of our lives, but I read me as a writer in the 1970s, things that I had written and kept and thrown in a box. So I read me in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 20s, almost 2020s. And I expected to see, and I just expected, I guess I hoped, but I certainly expected to see a sense of profound progression. You know, that I was always getting better. The funny thing is, I was always kind of me. You know what I mean? It started out there and it wound up there. It was like my punctuation got better and my spelling got better, but I did not see profound progress. I just saw myself. So the existential part of that is, I have a feeling, I had this thought, you are yourself before you know it. You're really yourself before you know. You keep saying, I'm changing. You're yourself before you know it.
That's really interesting. I want to recommend to all of you, when you read the book, make sure you read the chapter on Taylor Swift. No subject could possibly be further from our minds that Peggy Noonan would be writing about, but you write about her as almost an American hero.
Oh, I thought this was when Taylor Swift had just, was that 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, 3.
Two or three?
Yeah.
She had just begun this thing called the Eras Tour. And we all follow entertainment and show business. So I was following it lightly. And I'm starting to pick up things where this girl goes to a suburb of Dallas to a stadium, and she gives the local economy the biggest boost it's had in 20 years. Then she's doing really well, and then she gives like $1 million tip to everybody who works for her. I started to understand this is a phenomena. She is a powerhouse. And then I started to pay attention to her. she's all about music. I'm not into her music. I am not her demographic, and it just doesn't rock my world. But as a personality and as a businesswoman and as pretty much as a grown-up and a mature person who at the time I wrote was starting to fall in love with this football player, or at least it looked like they were starting to fall in love. And people were saying things like, no, that's another business proposition. I thought, you know what, I don't know what it is, but I hope it's real. I hope they get married and shake the whole stadium. Just go Taylor. So I'm very glad at how that's going. I still don't like her music, but good for Taylor. Good for her.
I think we can all just appreciate her stamina and her generosity as
Yes.
being a core American heroic value, and I think maybe that's what is so appealing about her.
That is
or you.
actually exactly what I meant to say.
Sorry.
That is totally what I meant.
You once asked Don Regan, now we're going to shift to politics, hopefully just for the last 5 minutes. What will history find out about this president, meaning Reagan, that it doesn't know now? What was his answer then about Ronald Reagan, and what do you think the answer might be about Trump looking through the long lens of history?
With a sense of horror but complete honesty, I will tell you I cannot remember what Don Regan said to me. What did he say?
I don't know.
Well, where did you get that from?
I got it from what I saw at the Revolution.
Oh, and
We
I
can look
didn't
it
do
up.
the answer? Well, here's what I would say now if I asked myself that question. I still think about Reagan, and I haven't changed my mind on him, but I've had variations on how I think of him. And at this point, and for some years now, I have thought of him as a very friendly and kindly introvert. You know, you never think of a political figure as more inward than outward. But Reagan, when I look back on it, was so happy sitting at his desk, writing. He was happy when he wrote his radio commentaries. He was happy writing letters to his friends. He was happy reading. He loved the old novels of the American West. He was happy watching old movies with Nancy on television. But when I think of him happy, I do not think of him first. You know, Reagan would never do the most standard political thing in the world without embarrassment. Reagan, as somebody told me who was an advance man for him, Reagan, when he was running for president, first in 76 and it didn't work, and then 80 and it did work. You know, the standard thing is you're a candidate for president. You go to New Hampshire, you go to the diner in Manchester. They open the door and you wade in and you say, "Hi, I'm Ron Reagan." And everybody's at a booth eating an egg. And you interrupt their breakfast very happily and say, "Hey, how are the pancakes?" And you hit them on the shoulder, you shake their hand, you kiss their baby, you do that. Reagan never wanted to do that. Reagan didn't think it was polite to interrupt somebody's meal. Reagan was murder for an advance man in a diner. He figured out how to do it, stay in one place, wave at everybody, say yes. If somebody said come over, he'd come over and shake their hand. But what an interesting inner life person as opposed to outer life person to have had for president. The other thing people ask me is what was it like to work with him? To an amazing degree. I mean, I was a writer. As I got to see Reagan and talk to him and know him somewhat, and after the White House also, I always was so curious about him, asking so many questions. I would have loved to have seen, believe me, I'm a writer, I would have loved to have seen the dark side of Ronald Reagan, the dark shadows, the inner angry man, all those things that you get to see with presidents and that you can later write about. That just was not there with Reagan. He seemed a kindly, humorous, gentle, non-aggressive, attentive, observant, never obnoxious, never emotionally pushy, happy man, and that's what he was. Exactly what he seemed like in public. That's who you worked for, which sure was lucky for me. I just thought of an anecdote. Can I share it?
Please.
It's so small, but I find myself, funny things run through your head. When I wrote my first speech for Reagan, just a nothing burger, they didn't assign me anything important. I'm the new kid on the block. They gave me some little thing to write in the Rose Garden. But I was so excited, and I was so ambitious, and I was so full of love. So instead of doing 2.5 of appropriate pages announcing the Teacher of the Year, instead I did like 10 or 12 pages. And it was a defense of the West against its unjust critics. And by the way, here's a Teacher of the Year. Her name is Mary. Reagan was so courteous that after he had seen it, he'd send it back to us through the staff secretary, and we would see his edits. Well, he hadn't edited it. He had drawn a line through every sentence, through every line. And then he wrote in the top, "Gee, so sorry. This is just such wonderful work." He knew I was new. He said, "This is just such wonderful work, but the event is so short. I had to cut it for time." And I was new. I didn't know he was being polite. I thought he was giving me a compliment. So I ran to Ben Elliott and said, "The president liked it. Look at what he wrote in the corner." And Ben looked and just laughed in my face again, because he knew, "Honey, you were very nicely told. We don't need 12 pages for a 2-page event."
Well, I think there's probably a lot of people in this room tonight who have a certain nostalgia for the era of republicanism represented by Reagan.
Yeah.
You've written about your impressions of the current White House and the contrasts to be drawn, perhaps, between the time of the Reagan Revolution and now. And you've never pulled any punches when it comes to your views on Donald Trump. And I know one essay is titled, "Imagine a Sane Donald Trump." And the first sentence of that essay is, "Let's face it, he's a nut, and you know he's a nut." If you were writing about the Republican Revolution's echoes in politics today, how can we draw a line from the Reagan White House to today's Republican Party? And
Oh, lady, I don't know. Can I tell you that with that column that you just spoke the first line of was a column of real poignance to me. It was the column I wrote the Thursday before the 2016 presidential election. So we had all been following Donald Trump for about a year. We all had an impression of him, or impressions. Maybe you've changed your mind along the way, maybe not. Maybe you've gotten softer in your feeling, maybe tougher in your feelings. But you had a sense at that time, his first election, of how you felt about him and judged him. And my horrible problem was that I so agreed with what was not then called the populist critique, but was an essentially populist critique of the Republican establishment. I just agreed with so much of it. And that was what Donald Trump said he stood for. I had been opposing illegal immigration and a functionally open border to the South since I argued with George W. Bush about it, since the early 2000s. I had come to believe the Iraq War and then Afghanistan were essentially foreign policy disasters. I wasn't worried about, Republicans traditionally worried about don't overtax the rich, help the poor, don't overtax the rich, and don't talk too much about the poor. Boy, I saw America exploding after roughly 2010. And I thought, that's not the way to go. You do what you have to do to help people now. America's in a kind of cultural crisis. So everything that Trump said he stood for was something I agreed with. And yet I found him as a person to be harem, scarum, nutty, and unacceptable to me. I could not vote for his opponent. I could not vote for Trump. I was not comfortable with Hillary Clinton, not comfortable with him. And so I thought, well, who the heck would I be comfortable with? Just an average Republican who would be acceptable to me. So I wrote in John Kasich. But it was the first time. Oh, isn't that something? I will try to find him and send him an email and tell him he rocked him at New Canaan's library. I've been doing write-ins ever since, I must admit. And I don't like doing write-ins. I think we should all try as hard as we can to support one party or the other, because oddly enough, choosing between this party and this party kind of keeps us together, if you know what I mean. It's conceding, all right, I can live with this party, or all right, I can live with that one. And I am preoccupied with keeping the country together. So I wish I did not feel I have to write in, but I do.
Peggy, would you say you're fundamentally optimistic about America and its future?
No. Here's why. Optimists tend to think the nice thing will happen. And so I just don't walk into the room, if you will, thinking the nice thing will happen. But I have faith and I have trust and I have hope. Trust may be the wrong word, but I have faith and I have hope. I kind of think God is in charge of history. I think that, I was talking to a great old priest of Rome very recently in July about how to view history. And he said to me, you know, we're all too impressed by the Enlightenment view of God and history. The Enlightenment view is God wound this whole world up and then sent it out and said, okay, world, go be the world. And then he went for a smoke. He said, no, that is not the Catholic view. He said he didn't feel it was a general Christian view. It's certainly not the Catholic view. In the Catholic view, God is here and alive. He didn't wind it up and throw it. He is still there with you. He is in life. He is in history right now. History is dynamic. He is dynamic. He is part of this drama, and he didn't make us and all our souls for us to simply disappear. He's a real player in the drama, so why don't you work with him? I found that very wise, don't you?
Indeed, indeed.
So anyway, I don't do despair. I'm never optimistic, but I certainly don't do despair. And I pray more as I get older.
I'd love to open this up now to the audience for questions. We will start the questioning down front.
Thank you.
We good? Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you. Wow. Field of Dreams, and New Canaan is great, and it's a beautiful night. Ronald Reagan. I don't even know how we can add to that. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to the next 400 articles. So thank you. Quick question for you. In your 2008 book, Patriotic Grace, you shared your concern about the decline of impartiality of the media, that the news was becoming too balkanized. We no longer shared or even had the same information. That was 17 years ago.
Yes.
Now
it's not new. It's not new.
Not new. I mean, the divisiveness and intolerance seem worse. The question is, with so much data and information, what can we do to get our political leaders and some piece of the media back to debating the issues, not debating the facts?
So the question is, how do we get our media, sorry, I didn't hear it.
Back to being more objective, less partial, and provide better information for people instead of caring so much.
Do you know what? I've been asked that question for about 30 years, and I have to admit I don't know what the answer is. There's a funny thing. When in the 40 years ago, in the 1980s, the idea that a funny thing called kind of a technological revolution was coming, and it was coming out of California, and it had to do with the internet and new ways of receiving TV, not just the big broadcast networks, but now cable. Oh, Ted Turner just started CNN. Oh my gosh, now there's going to be MSNBC. That all started in the 80s. And I always thought, this is going to solve the problem. It's going to solve the bias problem. Because there will now not be 10 great American media voices, newspapers and broadcasting. There will be 400 or 1,000. And you can find your own way to good work and honest presentation and a presentation of the facts. And so the person who provides those things will win. Well, the 400 and 1,000 news sources did happen, but everybody made their way to the one that kind of told them what they thought is the right thing. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to what arguably might be true. So I don't know the answer. But we're in the New Canaan Library, and I can tell you part of the answer may be read more books, because there are eternal truths there. But in a daily sense, look, I cover the waterfront in my reading, because I'm always looking for the telling detail, or I'm looking for the fact. I'm looking for the fact I can trust. And I figure if I read 28 things, I may get kind of a general picture of what happened. But you kind of got to read that many. It's funny.
We have a question here.
Yeah.
You're awesome. I just,
Thank you.
wow.
Thank you.
I was so excited to get a ticket to this. I served as state representative for 14 years.
Oh, wow.
With the fabulous Tom
Connecticut?
O'Day. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Norwalk and Darien.
Oh,
And there were 3 things that kept me grounded. 1, family and friends, amazing.
yes.
My faith community.
Ah.
And your column every single week.
Oh, my goodness. I kiss you. Thank you.
I do have a question. What's your writing process?
What's the what?
What's your writing process? How do you formulate the ideas? Do you work with a team? Do you have an editor that helps?
No, I work by myself. I work at home. I've never had an office at the Wall Street Journal. I thank you for everything you said. It was so gracious and kindly and generous. It's the damnedest thing. You would not think a 1,230-word column once a week would take up your week. But it does. Believe it or not, it just, and has from the beginning. When I was first called 25 years ago this summer, by Bob Bartley, who headed the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. And he said, you know, have you heard about this internet thing? We're going to have an internet page of the Wall Street Journal. Would you like to be our first columnist? I said, yeah. But he was sort of being absent-minded about it, and I had no idea what I was saying yes to. But it kind of totally became the central professional fact of my life. What do? Friday tomorrow is so wonderful. I edited my column that's up tonight in the car on the way here. It was fabulous, and then the minute I came here, I knew I could have fun. Tomorrow will be fun. I will be babysitting for my grandson, Peter. Thank you very much. He's just a dream. Oh, my God. I will not get out my phone and show you, but with everybody else I actually do, and admit that it's a horrible thing to do and make them scroll through with me, but he's my first grandson, so what do you want? So Fridays are lovely, Saturday is great, Sunday I start getting nervous again. What am I thinking about? What is my opinion? What am I researching? What is my topic? Is that topic worthy of my readers? We all have a million opinions, but not everything is worthy of the readers of a serious newspaper, not to mention the Wall Street Journal. By Monday, I'm getting down to, I mean that seriously, by Monday, I'm getting serious. Tuesday, I gotta have a topic. I start to research, I'm talking to people on the phone. Wednesday, I bring my notes together, and Thursday, I write a formal piece. So you wouldn't think it would be that big a deal for you, especially after all these years, but it is. But I thank you for asking. And I have a little office at home that's so sunny, and I have a white desk, and I have my little things all around me, and a TV on in the background, sometimes with old movies, sometimes with MSNBC, CNN, or Fox, so that if anything happens, I know. So that's it. But thank you very much.
Next question.
Mrs. Noonan, first of all, thank you again for sharing your wit and your wisdom with us tonight. It's been wonderful. Neil Postman wrote the book Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Oh, yes.
And I loved his observation that in the age of Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, they would listen, people had the attention span. They could listen for 3 hours to one side of the argument and then another 3 hours to the other side of the argument. And he observes that today we've been reduced through screens and texting and everything to every idea is reduced to abbreviations. And so
Yes.
you say we need to read more books. How do we start reading more in this country? How do we actually have college graduates that have read a book? Because there's some who haven't, actually.
Well, I would comfort myself when you lay out sort of Neil Postman and what he said about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They listened seriously. It sounds exhausting to follow logic and precision and eloquence without a lot of wasted time, words densely put in the air. It sounds exhausting that they would do that, but let's remember, it was a big, lonely, talkative nation. They were also grateful to get out of the cabin. It was an alcoholic country. They were kind of grateful to be in the sun with the sun shining and not drinking. So it was talking, especially about politics, was American entertainment for at least a century. You know how when political figures, quote, go on the stump? You know why it's called stumping or going on the stump? Because in every small town in America, and by small town I mean maybe a clearing in the woods of 4 cabins, they would ultimately knock down a tree and have, if you were the speaker that day, you'd stand on the stump. That's why you were stumping. So it was a big, lonely country. To me, it was kind of like Ireland until 1970. Nobody had anything to do, and they were all alone, so it was great when somebody came by and talked. It's like, oh, he's talking. Oh, that's good. I forget what my answer is to your question. In fact, I forget the question. But I think it is, how do you make yourself read more? Just try to carve out 40 minutes in a day. If it's the end of the day, fine. If it's the beginning of the day, fine. The old priest, this priest I mentioned before, it turned out, I said to somebody, who's he? He is the Vatican theologian. I met him in America, but he's the Vatican theologian, and he worked for Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, and now Pope Leo. So the fella knows his stuff. And he's the kind of fella who'd say things like, why don't you wake up in the morning, just read some scripture, ponder it for a few minutes, and then put on your iPad to find out what's the front page of the New York Times. So maybe reading more is baby steps. Thank you very much. Maybe it's baby steps. Anyway, I'm not worried about you. You're very smart already. I am worried about your grandkids. Okay? I don't know who's going to make them read.
One more question, I think. Is that right, Mickey?
My mic, okay. We have time for one more question.
It's a very enjoyable.
I'll just join others and
Another mic. I'm a real Reagan aficionado. I was too young in '80. I was old enough in '84 to vote for the Gipper, but I've really been intrigued by his relationship with John Paul II, how the former Archbishop of Krakow was a real Cold Warrior, and Reagan and Pope John Paul II, I guess, had a real relationship behind the scenes. Can you share what you saw with Pope John Paul II and President Reagan? Thank you.
I thank you for that. I never saw them together. I think it is the historical assumption, the historical assertion that Ronald Reagan, John Paul II, Margaret Thatcher, on a slightly different tier, Brian Mulroney in Canada, Helmut Kohl in Germany, all these people, they were like a cluster of fabulous political energy. And they stood for the same things and worked for the same things and nudged their nations forward and nudged the idea of freedom forward. I happen to think John Paul is not related to Reagan, but I think John Paul gave us two of the transcendent religious moments of the entire 20th century. One was when he met with and forgave his poor, stupid, cruel, dumb assassin, or would-be assassin, Mehmet Ali Agha, in prison, and forgave him, and just wanted to talk to him and let him know he was forgiven. There's a guy who shot him and almost killed him. The other is that when John Paul had been Pope for only, I'm going to get the time wrong, I'm thinking 12 months or 18 months, and went home to Poland. The Soviet Union foolishly allowed him to go home to Poland, one of the Warsaw Pact countries, under communism's yoke. They thought John Paul would play ball and be utterly anodyne and harmless and sentimental and cute and cuddly. And yet John Paul, as you know, looked at the people of Poland and said, they are not the truth. This is the truth. God looks down on Poland and he does not see a country owned by somebody else or a country torn in two. He sees a whole Poland. And all of the people of Poland went to his open-air masses. And then Polish TV wouldn't tell you that everybody had been there and what John Paul had said. And the people of Poland watched TV that night after being at a John Paul Mass, and they thought, wow, they don't tell us any of the truth. They are just liars here. And it was the beginning of the end of communist Poland. It's a gorgeous story. It is recounted in John Paul the Great, a book I wrote. I'm sorry to end on such a vulgar note, but I thank you very much.
Peggy, thank you so much.